you, Eric, with us. It's always a pleasure to interact with you. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here and to join you and your students and families across India.
Pleasure to have you. And I think Devesh Lati, the program manager at the Next Genius Scholarship Program, is also on the panel. Good evening, Devesh.
So, Devesh.
Great. So I see that the number of attendees is going up with every minute. So welcome everybody to this penultimate presentation in our series of how to fill the Common App. It's been a very exciting weekend. It's Monday, but I'm counting it as the weekend. Who knows these days what it is, Monday or Sunday. Today we have a very interesting discussion around the idea of obtaining scholarships and applying for need-based financial aid and how to fill the forms. If you're applying to a US college, how do you demonstrate your need? Eric is an absolute expert at showing us how to do this. You might laugh, Eric, but I know that you are, and the audience needs to know that as well. So I thought that today I will talk about, briefly before I pass the mic to Eric, to briefly show you some very interesting data. And if you can all see my screen, I'm showing you an Excel file. This is data that is collated from last year, made by two counselors in the US called Jeff Levy and Jenny Kant. They're very popular in that side of the world. And every year they produce this report. And I sort of went in there and shortlisted some colleges. And this is last year's data, so last academic cycle, of certain popular colleges where I know that lots of students from India like to apply. If we take the example of Barnard College, which is a small liberal arts college, a part of Columbia University located in New York, we can see that, to attend Barnard College, the cost of attendance is around $78,000 and $44 every year. So this being located in Manhattan, New York City, it's rather expensive, even in terms of living costs. And you can see that a total of 2,616 students girls attend Barnard, out of which 296 were international. That means about 11% of the undergraduate student body was international. And Barnard has a policy of awarding need-based financial aid for international students who apply to them. They do not offer merit-based scholarships, and they definitely do offer aid. So that's why there isn't a cross on the no need column. And you can see that a very small percentage of undergraduate students, young girls at Barnard, get this need-based scholarship. And on an average, if you've received need-based financial aid at Barnard, the average yearly package is just around $69,000. So that covers almost the entire cost of tuition plus some living. So that's such interesting data, because when I analyze that, it tells me that, as an international student, when you're applying to Barnard, your chances of getting need-based aid are so low. Now, obviously, looking at this data is like looking at stock market data from 2 years ago and predicting the future. We don't know what is going to happen this year and how the colleges are going to approach their need-based aid and their aid policies. But yet it gives us some insight and some perspective into how leading colleges across the US did it previously. Now, need-based financial aid is an absolute hallmark of US education, a great social equalizer, so to say, where colleges in the US, especially those who will offer need-based aid to international students, will recalibrate the cost of education for the family based on their looking at their financial data. And Eric is here today to talk about how to fill the International Student Financial Aid application, which is a very popular tool that is employed by many of the leading colleges in the US in assessing need. If I can I just wanted to show you this, that we have access to this data. And if any of you are looking for it, perhaps we can share this, Devesh, by sending an email to the participants who are here today. Extremely useful. It's updated every year and we have access to it every year. So I just wanted to show you this to highlight that if I sort this, before I jump to the ISSA, that so many colleges in the US will offer you need-based aid. Look at that, like 83 out of the sort of 150 colleges, just more than half will offer need-based financial aid. And I know that so many families in India get confused between need and merit and any other type of scholarships. So I just wanted to very quickly tell you, need-based aid is you present your financial paperwork, and if they can see in your accounting that your family cannot afford the the $75,400 at Bucknell, then Bucknell will reduce their fee and offer you even some money for living costs. Merit scholarships are awarded based on merit, and merit can be defined in so many different kind of ways. It might be athletic merit, academic merit, artistic merit, or something else. So many colleges offer merit-based scholarships as well. Even you can see almost equal in number to the need-based aid. And then there's only a handful of colleges which are popular with Indian students, which are in this list, that don't award any kind of aid to international students. And typically these tend to be the large public universities that are being funded by the taxpayers' money from that particular state. So it's understandable that, there's no love for the international student. So having shown you that, let me quickly jump into the ISFA. And this is what the ISFA looks like. We just call it the ISFA, which is short for International Student Financial Aid Application. And I know that Eric is going through it, but I just wanted to show you quickly what a PDF version of it looks like. Now, obviously, this is the 2018-19 version. And you, who's a grade 12 student, should be filling the 2020-21 version. And I just want to scroll through here so you can briefly see the kind of things that are on there. And I know in a few moments from now, Eric will be talking to you in detail through all of this. But just to give you a preview for the PDF, I just wanted to put this up once. So I don't expect you to read it, but just glance over it. These are the 5 pages that you will need to fill. So they're going to ask you a lot of information about your financial standing. So, having shown you that, let me stop sharing my screen and welcome Eric back to the stage. Eric, are you ready with the presentation? I know you're going to do a stellar job with explaining to people about how to fill the ISFA, so it's over to you. I just wanted to remind you, Eric, once that you're muted, if you could just unmute yourself, and I will mute myself.
All right, sorry about that. Let's try this again. All right. And again, good evening, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk about the International Student Financial Aid application. I have visited India many, many times over the years. I've been actively recruiting there since 2002, and it seems very strange this year not to be preparing at this very moment to travel to India, as I've done for many, many years in late August and early September. So this will have to be my visit to India right now, and I'm looking forward to interacting with you. So I want to talk a bit about need-based financial aid and sort of the philosophy of financial aid, need-based financial aid in the United States. As you know, higher education in the United States is decentralized. That means it's not a state or federal system, but it's a combination of private and public institutions. Public colleges and universities receive funding to some degree from the state in which they're located. University of California system, University of Massachusetts system. But private universities are much more common in the United States than they are in other parts of the world, and they receive no direct funding from the states in which they're located. Financial aid in the United States is distributed directly to students and parents. So with the exception of the public university funding, financial aid goes directly to students and parents, not to the institution. I think one really significant philosophical difference with other countries is that in the United States, we expect students and parents to contribute to the cost of their education as they are able. So we do expect students and parents to contribute in some capacity as they are financially able. The good news is that there are a variety of cost points, as the chart that Mr. Niraj just showed on the screen. There are a variety of cost points for families. International student financial aid is a little different than other financial aid that's provided to U.S. citizens and permanent residents because it's not funded and it doesn't come through the government. It comes through institutional funding, money that each college or university sets aside for need-based aid for international students. And it's based on what we call demonstrated financial need. And that's what this application is really all about. Financial need isn't what you want. It's not what you think you can provide. It's what you can demonstrate that you can provide. And that's why these questions in the application are as detailed as they are, so we can determine what you and your family are able to contribute based on data. Need-based financial aid usually takes one of three or more of three forms. Grants, which is the most common form. That's money that's credited to your account. On-campus employment. This is limited. You should not plan on working, having enough employment to pay for your education. This is basically a way to earn some of your personal expenses. And there are work limitations based on your F1 student status. And finally, as Mr. Niraj noted earlier, there are some college and universities that do not offer need-based financial aid. But let's get to the application itself. And there are two common forms of international financial aid applications. One is the ISSA that we're going to be talking about this morning. The other is the College Scholarship Service Profile Form, and these are the links for that form. The difference is the ISSA is free. The profile form does cost money to complete and to submit to each institution. The questions are going to be basically similar. The profile is an online form, and it does adjust currency values automatically without you having to do the conversion. But we're going to spend this morning talking about the more common form, the ISSA, that's typically available on a college or university website. I'm going to address some of the questions in a little more detail. I'm not going to discuss every question on the application. But just the ones that get, and I've read thousands of these over the years, so I really have an understanding of what works for a student and some of the problem areas or challenges students have faced in filling these applications out. And again, the more complete the application, the more thorough, the better we are able to assess your financial need and be in a position to award your money if you're admissible and eligible for aid. So question one is your name, and that sounds pretty basic, but it's important that you use the same name you used on the common application, and that should be the same name that's on your passport. These documents all have to be matched up, and if there's a variation in name, sometimes we don't get the proper documents matched with the appropriate individual's application record. So always make sure your name is consistent. Question A will ask for expected visa type. For almost all of you, that's going to be the F1 student visa. There will be some exceptions, but unless you have another type of visa from the United States, and you will know if you do, then you should check off F1 student visa on question A. Question 10 is very important that you not answer that question. And this is going to be contrary to everything else I'm going to say about filling this application out as completely as possible. Question 10 is a holdover from the old days, and I don't know why it's even still on this application. It asks you to list the names and colleges of the university to which you're applying. That used to be a pretty common question in the admissions world, and it's not anymore. As a matter of fact, best practices, our professional organizations frown on this even being asked, and it's been removed on almost every admission application that I can think of. Do not answer this question. It is not important. You will not be impaired in the process if you don't answer this question. Where else you're applying is your business. It's not the business of the institutions that you're submitting this application to. So simply do not answer this question. It's information that that will not be helpful to us, and it simply is not our business where else you're applying. On page 2, you start answering parent information, and it's important that you and your family sit down together and complete this application. And students, I would really encourage you to become familiar with the information that's asked in this application, so that you're familiar with your financial situation as you go through the application process and when you're enrolled at a U.S. college or university. Most of the questions are pretty straightforward. One that I will point out is the situation if your parents are separated or divorced, and this gets a little more complicated. If your parents are divorced, then you should provide the financial information for the parent considered what's called your custodial parent. That's the parent that you lived with most of this last calendar year. And if that parent is remarried, then you include your step parent information. But having said that, it is very typical, very common for us to ask for information about your non-custodial parent, the parent that you don't live with for most of the last academic year or the last calendar year. That parent information may also be important in our process. So I strongly encourage you, if you're in a divorced family situation, to have both sets of parents complete this information so that you have it available to you if there are any questions. Question 15, I think, is a little more interesting for students from India, many of whom live with blended families. That's not common in the United States, living with larger extended family. So this question will ask how many people, including yourself, depend on income for your parents' daily living expenses. You can provide that number, but I would strongly encourage you to include additional information about that situation because we won't necessarily understand that family situation if you list 12 people. And we see that you have, 2 siblings and your mother and father. Who are those other 8 people? So the more information you can provide, the more helpful that is for us and explain the circumstances. Also be aware that although people like me in the admissions community travel to India and are, I think, more familiar with Indian culture, oftentimes the people reading these financial aid applications ultimately are not. So they may not understand your family dynamics. So the more information, the better when it comes to explaining this question. Question 16 will ask for some cost information about education for your siblings, if they're going to university or if they're going to school. And just be sure you enter that amount in US dollars. Section C moves on, and this is where it's really important to work with your family and to gather all the documents you need to really answer these questions thoroughly. Section C is financial information. The first question to address is what documentation will you be providing to verify your income and assets? And this is something you want to start working on relatively early because these documents can take some time to pull together. And that's true for families in the US and around the world. One set of documents would be tax documents that you provide to any either your federal government or to your state government or your local government. Have these available before you start the application because they will provide valuable information. You also will be asked to submit these. You can scan them as a PDF and attach them to the application. Statements from employers to verify income. Other bank statements that show the amount of money you have in a savings account or checking account. Anything that you can document to support the information you're putting on this application is strongly encouraged. If we receive a financial aid application without documentation, it's really hard for us to assess that. Then we have to start asking you for that information. So again, a complete application that's well documented is really important, especially early on in the process. So I would really encourage you now, as you're thinking about applying to the United States, to start pulling these documents together so that they're readily available for you as you go through the process. Question 18 asks you about the official exchange rate. Yesterday I looked and it's about 75 rupees to $1. Also annotate the date that you did that conversion. If you fill this application out in say December, and we're reading it in March. There may have been currency fluctuations, so it's helpful for us to get a sense of when you made those calculations and revisions so that we can act accordingly. And finally, question 19, does your government impose currency restrictions on the exchange and release of funds? If so, just let us know what those are. I don't believe there are any significant restrictions in India currently. Continuing on, question 20, sources of emergency funds once you arrive in the United States. Now, some of these questions are also going to appear in another financial document called the International Student Certification of Finances, and that's the document that you'll need to complete in order to receive a F1 student visa. So when you're filling this application out, some of these questions will look familiar when you fill out that other document. And this is these questions both appear on both applications. Emergency funds is the money you have available when you arrive in the United States to cover unexpected expenses. Things like an emergency trip home, medical expenses not covered by your student health insurance, or other situations not out of the ordinary. If you don't have any, you can just put down 0. There's no requirement that you have that, but you should be thinking about that and budgeting for that. And if you do, then put that amount in on the application. And how will you pay for your transportation to the United States? That's typically by family, but again, there are a variety of other sources. But that would include your airfare to the United States and the ground transportation from the airport to the institution. All right, now this is when we start gathering data in the next section of section C, the financial information. And what we're asking for in this section is a lot of financial data. But we're asking for how much of your household income before taxes or expenses, what in the United States we call your gross income. Net is what you have available after you pay taxes and expenses, and gross is what you receive up front. So this is asking for your gross income. And it asks for your father's work, mother's work, your work if you've got a job, if you're married, which most of you I doubt are married, your spouse's income. Family business or businesses. So the gross income from your family business or businesses, and it's important to include all of your businesses. Any family real estate holdings from which you derive income, rental properties. Pension, retirement, or annuity expenses, if you pay into any kind of retirement funding, which typically is more of a US phenomenon. If you receive income from other members in the household, for example, you have an older sibling who works and provides income, then that should be included as well. Any money earned from interest or dividends on stocks and bonds. Housing, food, or other allowances. And I think a good example of that is if you're in the military, for example, are you provided a food allowance, a housing allowance, clothing allowance, anything like that should be included in this section. Then any other kind of income that isn't included here that would be important for us to know. Question 23, when my mother used to fill this out, this was her favorite question. She said, I'm supposed to tell them about the unexpected. How do I expect the unexpected? But I think more to the point, if you know that there's going to be something changing in your family situation, you should include that. And a good example would be if one or both of your parents are going to retire in the next year. That will impact family income. So anything that you know that's going to be coming down the road in the next year or so that will affect finances, sale of a property, change of job, retirement, anything included that. And again, the more information you can provide about that, the more helpful it will be. Section D goes on to ask about asset information. And these are assets that you and your family have. They can include land and buildings, not your home or business, but if you own, for example, a second property, a vacation home, other property that you rent out, money in savings accounts, how much you have invested in stocks and bonds, any assets that you as an individual student own. You may, for example, have stocks and bonds. You may have property in your name, any assets that you have. Money owed to your family by others. If your family has loaned money to others, And also, if you expect repayment on that in the coming year, how much are you expecting to receive in repayment from the person to whom or persons to whom you lent money? And finally, any significant jewelry, art, or antiques that your family has. So again, this is looking at assets, not just income, but assets that your family controls. Section E is expenses. This may take a little time to calculate, but looking at your income and assets, how much of that money do you spend on sort of core essential expenditures during the course of a year? So that would include rent or mortgage, your utilities, food and clothing, medical expenses, educational expenses for siblings going to school or university, any loan payments you make, taxes you pay. Again, you can sort of go down and see what these categories are. They're pretty straightforward, but you really need to calculate what those are for each year. Now remember, we're reading this in conjunction with your application. So for example, under vacations, if you put 0, yet you write in your essay that you spent a great vacation scuba diving in South Africa, well, that's a vacation. So you must have spent something on it. So again, you want to be sure that all of your information matches and is accurate. So again, I think it takes a little bit of time sometimes to calculate these expenses because it's not something you normally do. But again, the more accurate these are, the more helpful it is for us in assessing your financial need. Section E also continues on with question 31. Does your family employ other people? How many in the home? In India, it's very common to have staff or servants. It's not in the United States. So I think this is a question where you really need to expand and not just list the number, but then talk a bit about how many staff you have and what they do for you. That's not something that's common in the United States. So I think a little bit of explanation from you can really help us better understand that. Section F is very, very important. And this is one section where I've seen a lot of errors or incomplete information that affects our ability to really analyze a student financial aid application. There are 4 columns in this section, one for each of the 4 years in which you'll be a student in the United States. So if you're filling out the 2020-2021 form, it'll start with academic year 2021. The next will be 21-22, 22-23, 23-24. And what you need to indicate is the expected amount of annual support from each of these sources. And again, this information should be identical to the information you're going to provide on the International Student Certification of Finances. And that's one point that I often see. The information here is very different than what's on the Student Certificate of Support, which asks you the identical questions. So you want to make sure that those 2 forms match because they should. They're not separate, they're related, and you want to make sure that you're accurate in both of them. Student vacation earnings or employment, if you're working, any money that you make that you'll be contributing toward your education. Anything from your assets, are you planning to sell something, a stock, a bond, or property that may be in your name? Family income, and this is important. This is a common mistake. In this section, oftentimes students will put their gross family income here. That's not what they're asking for. They're asking how much of that income can your family provide to pay for your education. So let's say your gross income is 10,000 rupees and your family is going to be able to spend 1,000 rupees in the first year of your education. You put 1,000 rupees, not 10,000. Students oftentimes will put the gross family income. It's not asking for the income, it's asking how much of that income you will use toward the cost of your education. Same with family assets, relatives and friends. Do you have an uncle or auntie who may be willing to provide, or a grandparent who's going to provide funding for you? Your government, if there's a government scholarship that you're going to be awarded, any agencies or foundations that are providing scholarships, and any kind of private sponsors, someone like a friend of the family that may be providing funding. So you need to, really think carefully about these, be as accurate and as honest as possible. don't underestimate, don't overestimate, try to be as accurate as possible. And again, the question about unexpected or special circumstances. And again, if you have them, please share them. The more information we have, the more we're able to really accurately and thoroughly evaluate your application. Now, I've got some tips to help finish this application in a way that will really be to your advantage. One is when you're filling it out, be very neat, use block letters. If you write quickly and we can't read it, then we have to go back to you, and it really takes more time, and it can really impact how we can read the application. Be careful to enter numbers clearly. Make sure we can understand what that number is. And again, people sometimes write them really quickly. Is it a 7 or a 9? Is it a 2 or a 3? We can't quite tell. And I also want to point out that there is a difference in how, and this sounds trivial, but it's not, how commas are used to denote denominations in India versus in the United States. And the example I have here, 5 lakhs in India is equivalent to $500,000 in terms of not currency, but in terms of how we would annotate it. See where the commas are here. In the US system, the comma comes after the 3rd digit from the right. You do it a little bit differently in India. So 500,000 for us versus 5 lakhs here. So do you see the difference? That gets very confusing if you're using Indian notation with US dollars on the application. So I recommend you just don't use commas at all. That's more clear for us. If you're going to use commas, remember you go 3 digits, comma, 3 digits, comma. But it's best if you just don't use any commas at all. Again, it can just be a little complicated for us. At first glance, that looks like 5 million, which is different than 500,000. And finally, just a tip in general. We spend a lot of time reviewing these applications. It's very important for us. And as I said, I just can't clarify enough. The more information we have, the more accurate, the more documentation we have, the easier it is for us to really assess your demonstrated financial need to see if we can award you aid. We want to award you aid if you're eligible and we have the funding available. So I think that's all for the application. And I think now we have time to discuss some questions.
Eric, that was very helpful. Thank you so much. I enjoyed listening to you. And as I was listening, I was thinking about all those hundreds and thousands of applications that you have gone through and so much wisdom that is up in your mind. So lots and lots of questions have been pouring in. I have been nonstop, typing answers to them, and still they continue to pour in. So maybe I can have your insights on some of these questions.
All right, be glad to.
So number one is, where do I submit this ISSA? Is it on the Common App? Is it somewhere else? What's been your experience?
Somewhere else. It typically will either be on the International Admissions webpage, or it'll be linked to a college or university's Student Financial Aid or Student Financial Services office. We'll have a link with forms. If you're not sure, just email the admissions office and they can send you the link to the document. It's usually a PDF that you can download. Unfortunately, it's not an online version that you can fill in, but typically you can get it from the admissions webpage or the financial aid office webpage for that institution.
Yeah, and this is one of those irritating things, right? Because every college does it differently.
Yes.
And it takes so much time and effort to pursue this.
The one good thing about the International Student Financial Aid application, though, is you fill it out once, and it's the same for every institution. So you can then photocopy it or just scan it and then send it to multiple institutions. You don't have to revise it for each institution, or it's the same application, same documentation, and it's free. There's no charge for it.
Great, thank you. The second question is, when should a student submit this? Is it in line with the early action, early decision, regular decision?
Yes, or? I would say in almost all cases, it's due the same day, the same deadline as the actual admission application, because oftentimes they're looked at together.
Okay, thank you. The next question, and this was asked by a counselor who's attending the session today, is, do colleges look for proof of assets?
We look for documentation, but no. I mean, I think in terms of, we're not going to send a private investigator to India to make sure that your assets are accurate, but we're going to look for documentation. So you need to provide some kind of evidence of that asset. You know, to a certain degree, this is an honor system. So that's why it's important to be accurate and thorough, and provide all the documentation you can. You know, if we see information that's not supported, then that, you know, that leads to, well, is this really accurate, or is there more money available, or, you know, we don't know. So, you know, I think, you know, we're not going to require, but we may. In some cases, we may say we need more documentation. So again, it's going to be a case-by-case basis, but in general, we're not going to require everyone to provide extensive documentation on every asset. But if there's a question, we may come back and ask for more information.
Thank you, Eric. The next question is, do colleges reject applications based on their financial need?
Yes, they do. That's a great question. So there are two different approaches to need-based financial aid for international students. One is called need-aware. The other is called need-blind. Need-blind institutions do not look at your financial situation when they make their admission decision. They will base it on your application. The number of institutions that do that is very, very, very small. Some Ivy League institutions, some other really highly selective institutions, they are need blind, so they will admit you regardless of your finances. Keep in mind, however, that they have budgets, so they can't admit everybody that's got high needs. So, so they are very selective, and you will see that the number of students to whom they give aid is a small number because, again, for budget reasons. The other approach is need aware. And that's one I'm more familiar with in the institutions I've worked at, in which case we do look at your financial situation in making our admission decision. So for example, if our total cost of attendance is $70,000, and we look at your financial aid application and see that you and your family can provide $10,000 a year, well, we're able to give you $5,000 in need-based aid and $10,000 in merit scholarship. That means you have a total of $25,000 to pay for your education. $10,000 from your family, $5,000 in need-based aid, and $10,000 in merit aid. That leaves you with $45,000 left that you have to come up with. If that's the case, a need-aware institution would deny you admission, because even with your family contribution and the amount of financial aid and scholarship that the institution will provide, you will not have enough money to pay for your education. So you will receive a letter basically saying that. It's not based on your academics. You'll probably be very, very admissible. It's simply due to finances. In some cases, we do that with US citizens as well. So it's not just international, but remember that the international funding is more limited because we're having to use our own institutional funding. We're not getting funding from the government to help us support financial aid for international students. So our amount of funding is more limited. Typically, if you are denied because of finances, you will have an opportunity to appeal that decision. And oftentimes family will say, oh, well, you know, now my uncle agreed to provide, you know, $25,000 or $35,000. So it is possible to have us reconsider that as well. It's not a final decision. If your financial situation has changed or we misunderstood it, you can appeal that decision.
Thank you, Eric. You mentioned US citizens and international students. Lots of parents have been asking me about, if I'm a US citizen living abroad, do I still need to fill the ISSA, or is the FAFSA sufficient?
Now, if the student is a US citizen or a permanent resident alien, has a green card, then it's a separate application process. You have to fill out what's called the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And you have to go to that website, log in, create an account. And typically you will probably also have to fill out the CSS profile, and not the international one, but the US one. Now this gets a little complicated because it's designed for U.S. citizens. It will ask very U.S. centric questions, and you're going to have to sort of convert information into that format. But the good news is, because you're a U.S. citizen or permanent resident alien, you are eligible for federal financial aid and state financial aid. International students aren't. So you have access to a much greater source of funding. So I strongly encourage, even if you don't think you're going to need money, to fill out at least the FAFSA, because that gives you eligibility to federal loan money. So definitely encourage you to fill out the FAFSA. The other thing I should have said as a tip was, when you're filling these forms out, you're inevitably going to have questions. Feel free to contact the admissions office, or more importantly, the financial aid office, any institutions to which you're applying, and ask them how to answer the question. If you don't know how to answer it, they'll be glad to help you. Again, we don't want the application to be the barrier to you not receiving funding. We want you to receive funding if you're eligible for it. So they'll be glad to help you clarify and answer those questions. So, don't feel afraid, to answer without the right context. Just ask us, and we'd be glad to help you with that.
Thank you, Eric. So the next question is a very interesting one, and it highlights the differences between our two great nations. Our financial year here in India, it's March to April, whereas in the US, the financial year is October ending in September. So when, the ISSA asks me to enter the information for previous financial year, and I am an Indian parent, what should I be looking at? Let's say my child is applying for fall 21. Should I then, enter everything in line with my 2018-19 and 19-20? What's your recommendation?
Yeah. I would ask for taxes, the most recent tax year for which you filed. So in the United States, that would be tax year 2000. Obviously, if families are filling this out now, it would be 2019. So because our tax year is January through December, so it's tax year 2019. And then after families have submitted, say you do that in December of this year, you haven't filed taxes for 2020, so you can't provide those. So you do for 2019. And then later in the spring, after you've completed in the US, the 2020 tax return process, then you are asked to provide that funding, that information as well. But for the initial purpose, you provide the previous tax year. In the US, we also will look at 2018. So I would recommend providing 2 years worth of tax information from the most recent year and the year before that. So for example, the US, that would be 2018, 2019.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And I think we are just almost out of time. I have one last question for you, which is, would it affect my application if my sibling is also applying for loan or need-based aid?
Yes, actually. In the United States, the formula that's used to determine eligibility for federal aid, using, say, for example, the FAFSA, is a formula developed by our Congress. You can imagine how complicated it is. But part of that formula, one thing that helps a student is if you have a sibling, a brother or sister in college or university at the same time as you, obviously there's greater expenses. So that actually increases your financial need. So yes, that has a significant impact if you're going to have a sibling who's enrolled at college or university. And we use that same philosophy with the ISSA as well. So if you have a sibling, that's a benefit.
Great, thank you. I'm just answering so many questions that are showing up here. But I think we have now run out of time. Thank you, Eric, so much for this wonderful presentation. It was great to have you and great to be on another panel with you. And I apologize to the scores of people who have been asking nonstop questions. We've done our best to present this. We've done our best to try and answer as many questions as possible. Just as a footnote to this presentation today, if you are interested in applying to any of the colleges that are on the list and charter with the Next Genius Foundation, I would encourage you to apply to the Next Genius Scholarship Program right away. In partnership with our partner colleges, we offer full and partial tuition scholarships. And I think for many of you who are here and looking for need-based aid, merit-based aid, the Next Genius Scholarship Program is a very relevant opportunity.
Yeah.
So please do consider that. And that is my sort of parting shot for the day. Devesh, do you have anything you want to add?
No, that's it. Thank you so much, Eric and Dr. Mandana, for sharing this wonderful presentation and for answering so many questions. Of course, since we could not take all the questions, I would recommend all of you to just get in touch with us, and we'll help you connect with Eric directly, and he'll help you out with some questions. And we are now ready for our final session for this webinar series. We are going to where Miss Annie Murphy from Center College is going to share about how to reach out to the admission officers from different colleges. I would like all of you to join us for this final session in the series.
Great. Thank you, Devesh, and thank you so much, Eric. Look forward to being in touch.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it. Thank you. Good luck to all of you.
Thank you.